Hi, Dr. Dolly, and thank you for all that you do. I'm a fourth-year medical student and thus will soon be going into residency and just had some questions on nuts and bolts of 403B investing. My understanding is that it's employer dependent as to if you can move money from your 403B into your IRA while you're still employed at that same institution. I've done it in the past, but it's not while I've actually been employed still. So I was curious on that. More concerning, though, to me are any limitation issues that might come into play if you do so. Specifically, say you put 6,000 into your IRA and then 19,500 into your 403B. If you then move that 19,500 into that IRA, is that fine? That rollover, or does that actually count as a contribution, putting you above that $6,000 limit? If that isn't a concern, I would think everyone would want to do this in order to be able to pick better options than maybe the 403B or 401k may provide, which I don't really hear about a lot of people doing that. So if there are any other concerns that I'm not thinking of, I would really appreciate hearing about them. I was also curious how often you recommend rebalancing within like a Roth IRA. There, to my understanding, aren't really taxes or fees that come into play, but for momentum's sake, I've heard to maybe still just do it every 12 to 18 months. So any thoughts you have, I would appreciate. Thank you.
Okay, can you move money from a 403B to an IRA while you're still employed? The IRS doesn't tell you that you can't do that. They have no rule against that whatsoever. However, in practice, most plans don't let you do that. Most of them require you to separate from the employer before you can roll any money out of that plan. It's interesting. We've been putting a 401k plan in place, and I'm looking at all the cool features that it can have and trying to implement them, as many of them as you can have. And I'm surprised how many things you can do with a 401k that a lot of employers just don't do, or their advisors sometimes recommend against, because it means money coming out of a pool of money that they can charge AUM fees on. But plans are allowed to offer you in-service rollovers. It's not illegal, but the plan has to allow it. The plan document has to specify you can do it, and honestly, most don't. Do rollovers count toward your contribution limits? No, they don't. Okay, you can roll money into an IRA, and that has nothing to do with your $6,000 per year IRA contribution amount. All right, let's talk about rebalancing for a minute. How often should you rebalance? Well, if you look at the data, it suggests that the optimal interval is between every 1 to every 3 years. You certainly don't have to be rebalancing every day or every month or every quarter or something like that. Every couple of years is probably fine. If you don't want to do it on a time-based interval, some people do it using a rule that says when it gets a certain amount out of whack, you rebalance everything. For example, the 5-25 rule. What that says is that if any asset class becomes either an absolute 5% higher than it's supposed to be, so if you're supposed to have 25% of your portfolio in that asset class and it hits 30%, then you rebalance the whole portfolio. The 25 portion is applied to smaller allocations within the plan. For example, if your plan calls for a 10% allocation to an asset class and it falls to 7.5%, meaning a 25% relative reduction in that asset class, then that triggers you to rebalance the whole portfolio. So those are kind of the two main methods of doing it. Let me tell you how I do it. I just direct new money at whatever is lowest. So for example, I have my desired asset allocation with all of its percentages. For example, part of that is I keep 25% in a total U.S. stock market fund. And if that is falling and it's, the stock market really fell hard and it's time for me to invest my monthly investment amount, and total U.S. stock market has done the most poorly of all of my investments, of all the asset classes in my portfolio, then that's where I direct the new money. And most of the time, at least for the first 10 or 15 or 20 years of your investing career, that's enough to keep the portfolio rebalanced enough. You don't need exact to the dime rebalancing because the next day it's all going to be screwed up anyway, as different asset classes have different returns. So those are kind of the ways most people rebalance. If you want your questions answered by the White Coat Investor, record your question at whitecoatinvestor.com/YQA or click the link in the description.